Now, as I mentioned at the start, of course, we're going to be talking about the Labor leadership. That is the issue that is focusing all the minds of the Labor MPs in Canberra as we speak. But really the bigger issue here is what's happening to the Labor Party. On all the available evidence, federal Labor is heading for an electoral disaster. Now, this comes hot on the heels of disastrous, historically bad results in the New South Wales state election and the Queensland election. So the issue here is what's happening, what are the big problems for Australia's oldest political party, the Australian Labor Party. How does it get a grip of these problems, improve its standing? How does it reform itself? So you can see clues about this, what the problems are all around us. But I noticed one last week in what was quite an important and news-breaking interview here on Sky News when political editor David Spears interviewed the AWU union boss Paul Howes, who's also obviously a very influential figure in Labor Party politics. He was one of the power brokers who put Julia Gillard into the Prime Ministership, and importantly last week he stood by her. And that's why David Spears' interview with Paul Howes made news, because Paul Howes was restating his support for Julia Gillard. But there was something else in that interview about this Labor government and about what it's been up to that I think gives us a really strong clue as to why Labor is hitting such disastrous problems. Have a look.
The Labor governments are elected to transform the country. They're not there just to be a steady hand on the tiller. The Australian people elect Labor governments to make radical change. Julia Gillard, the Gillard government, has delivered that change to make Australia a fairer and better society.
The Labor government was elected to make radical change. Now, you know, this is a very, very telling comment from Paul Howes. There's no doubt that we've seen some radical change. There was a carbon tax. That has to be called radical. We've seen a weakening of our border protection regime, softening of our border protection. That was a radical change. We even saw an attempt to regulate the print media. These are radical changes, yes. But the problem for Paul Howes and the problem for the Labor Party is that they never promised to do any of these things. The 3 points, the 3 policy changes I've mentioned there, those radical changes were never promised prior to the election. In fact, what we've seen from the Labor government is actually promised to be an economically conservative government, promise strong borders, promise exactly what Paul Howes scoffs at there, promised to be a steady hand at the tiller. They promised steady government. In fact, people have likened Kevin Rudd's initial campaign as promising to be Howard Light. So there's your clue to why Labor is in strife federally. They promised a steady hand at the tiller. They did not promise radical change. But what they've delivered against those promises has been radical policies. That's my viewpoint.